when I woke up this morning, I was feeling pretty dangerous.
Jameson Williams has been so impressive these last couple of weeks. What's going on, draft fans? Welcome back to Cover One, the NFL Draft Podcast. I'm Russell Brown, and I'm back in the saddle. It's been about a week. I haven't done an episode, I believe, since last weekend. I didn't have a chance to really get into doing an audio show last week because I was doing so much other stuff with our podcast here on the Cover One Network, from doing the Air Raid Hour, from doing the Cover One, the Disguise Coverage podcast with Anthony, and then I just had some radio stuff in between all of it, so it just didn't match up to where I was able to get in the studio here and pump out some content from an audio perspective for the podcast. But we're back today. We're going to get into it because the NFL Draft is basically underway officially now because the Super Bowl is done. We are done with the NFL. College football's been done for a while, and you hate to see it go, but it's now time to fully put our eggs in the basket of the NFL Draft, which we do on this podcast every single time. Every time we're recording a show, we're doing NFL Draft stuff. So if you want to get caught up, you're just joining us, you're a Rams fan, you're a Bengals fan, maybe you're a Chiefs fan and you're still trying to cope with the loss against the Bengals. If you're one of those people, you're way behind. You can get caught up with the Cover One NFL Draft Podcast by simply searching the Cover One NFL Draft Podcast in Spreaker, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, literally whatever platform you find your podcast. Search the Cover One NFL Draft Podcast. Put us into your mix by rating, reviewing, and subscribing to the show. And I promise you can go back to the summer. You're going to find out a lot about guys that I watched during the summer. You'll find out about my former co-host, Damian Parson, who went on to the Draft Network. You'll find out some of his thoughts on particular quarterbacks, running backs, receivers, defensive players. Pretty much you name it, we talked it, we spoke about it. And we've been doing it all throughout the summer, the fall, and I've been doing the show on my own since November and gotten into a lot of different topics, did some Senior Bowl stuff. So if you're still getting caught up from that, over the last 2 weeks, there was tons of Senior Bowl content from me. So again, you can find it on the Cover One NFL Draft Podcast by searching the show at Spotify, Spreaker, Apple Podcasts, wherever you get your shows. Subscribe to us, add us to the mix. And of course, you can find me on Twitter at Russ NFL Draft. So let's get into this. The draft order is set. I honestly don't even remember where we really left off. I think we left off somewhere around like 21 or 22 with New England and Las Vegas. And then we got into a bunch of Senior Bowl stuff and kind of previewing for that. So we never really finished up the draft order. And I'm not gonna finish it because there's actually a lot of different stuff that we're going to be doing here, breaking it down by conference, by division, and all of that stuff. But I do want to recap the Super Bowl briefly, and I just want to bring up the conversation because it's the Los Angeles Rams. Now, it is a Wednesday for me, and they were celebrating their parade. And again, I didn't have a chance to jump on yesterday or Monday to give a recap and give my thoughts initially from the Super Bowl. So that's what I'm doing here today because my boy, Matthew Stafford, who I've defended on this podcast probably 100 times at some point. On Twitter, I've defended him millions of times. To my friends here in the Metro Detroit area, I've done the exact same thing. This is my boy, and this is my guy. This is my quarterback, and he goes out and he wins a Super Bowl a year after getting traded from Detroit to LA, and it's pretty remarkable. And it just goes to show maybe the draft is overrated. I don't really know. I mean, the amount of picks that they've traded, to grab guys like, Sony Michel, Odell Beckham Jr., Matthew Stafford, the moves that they did over the last several years has been remarkable, and it's paid off for the Rams. We'll see how it ends up long-term moving forward, but really they got the payout. They got the payoff, and that is the Super Bowl. Nobody can hold that against Snead. Nobody can hold that against Stafford. Nobody can hold that against Aaron Donald, Sean McVay. None of it. And it's remarkable what they were able to do and how they were able to get in and how they were able to finish in the playoffs. Matthew Stafford to go 4-0 in this year's playoffs goes to show the team around him is very good, but he also played out of his mind as well at times. And sure, some interceptions, but there was an interception in that Super Bowl. It wasn't his fault. Bounced off his receiver's hands, who tried to one-hand the catch. And sure, you could say, oh, well, he let him too far. Dude, get your right arm up. Get your right arm across your body and make a play. It's the Super Bowl. But I digress. My guy goes out, gets a ring. Am I jealous? As a fan of a particular team, yes. But that team is god-awful. That's the Detroit Lions, who, keep in mind, has 2 first-round picks. And I've struggled with what they should do at 32. Now that they officially have it, it kind of, over the last 2 weeks, has felt they're going to have pick 32. And, of course, what are the odds, right? Only the Lions, only my team can go out, take a quarterback like Matthew Stafford of that caliber, trade him to a team like LA, get a very, very average, and most people would say a below average quarterback in Jared Goff. But to get 2 first-rounders, it's great. But they're the only team to where when they get those first-rounder, it's going to be the 32nd pick in the first round, the last pick. You look at what Philadelphia has done, right? They traded Carson Wentz to Indy. They got the 16th pick. You look at what Chicago did to get Justin Fields. They made that trade with the Giants. The Giants now, not only are they bad in their own right, but Chicago still sucks, and the Giants have pick 5 and 7. You look at Seattle. They struggled this year. They traded for Jamal Adams. They gave up a first-round pick, and the Jets now have pick 4 because they're bad, but they also get pick 10 because Seattle's not great either. So it's just like one of those things where it's like, man, of course my team makes that trade. And many people are like, man, they could have traded him to Carolina and potentially had a top 10 pick last year. And then they might have even had an extra first-round pick this year, but they would have had a first-round pick next year and probably would have got Sewell and Michael Parsons, who won Defensive Rookie of the Year. So it's crazy. Only the Lions, though, but I'm so torn on this because Cincinnati at pick 31, the Rams at pick 32, you just don't know what Detroit's going to do at this spot. You don't know what quarterbacks are going to be there. You don't even know if they're going to value any of these quarterbacks. Could they be fortunate enough to land a Malik Willis because there's a lot of upside there? Maybe. Could he be there? It just doesn't seem like it. Everything that you've heard, Pittsburgh loves him, but also teams in the top 10 love him. I have a hard time believing he's going to get out of that top 15 area. I just have a hard time buying that. Crazier things have happened, but it's hard for me to believe. Detroit does have ammunition, though, to make moves, get up into the draft board, get into a spot to grab a guy like Malik Willis if they want. But they could also have Desmond Ridder fall to them at 32, and I wouldn't be mad at that. They could also have Sam Howell fall to them at 32, and I wouldn't really be upset with any of these quarterbacks because I think at least you're showing, hey, we want to invest into the future because we don't know what Jared Goff really is because the sample size of good football is only about 4 or 5 weeks long to end the year, and it really wasn't even good football. It was just more so he was able to manage the game, and a lot of that managing was because Dan Campbell was calling the plays, heavy on the run, didn't have to do much, and by that point, the season was over. You didn't have to throw it 40 times to try to make up for being down 21. At that point, you just didn't care. And again, they cared, right? Like Dan Campbell, his team, they cared. They battled. They always did. But it's just one of those things. So I'm just torn because I love the thought of an Aiden Hutchinson at 2 or a Kayvon Thibodeau at 2. But beyond that, at 32, just draft a good football player. I think that's just where I'm at. I would love to see Kyler Gordon from Washington in Detroit. I would love to see, Jahan Dotson from Penn State in Detroit. I would love to see even a Drake London or a Treylon Burks in Detroit. I just don't know if we're going to get that. I might be a little bit too wishful there, but I can tell you this from a Rams perspective, from the outside looking in, this team, the first 2 picks, or at least one of these first two picks at pick 31 or 63, the Cincinnati Bengals better draft. They better draft an offensive lineman. I don't know which one they're going to draft. I don't know if they're going to move up in the draft to try to get, Zion Johnson or Trevor Penning, or maybe Charles Cross falls a little bit and they move up to take him. Anything can happen, but Cincinnati needs to move and make some moves up front for Joe Burrow. And maybe it's going out and spending some money. Maybe they go out, they spent some money on the defense this past year, right? Like DJ Reader, they gave him a contract. They traded for B.J. Hill. They brought in Trey Hendrickson. They did a lot on their defensive line, and it worked. It helped. Do they look at the offensive line and do the same thing? Maybe. They just re-signed Zach Taylor. He's got a big deal coming to stick around for a little while. So if they do, I think Cincinnati really needs to consider protecting Joe Burrow, because getting sacked a total of 70 times in the regular season, between the regular season and postseason, is just ridiculous. It's ridiculous. So if they are going to spend some money, I will say this. For Bengals fans out there, Brandon Sheriff is probably going to be available from Washington. I would be shocked if he re-upped his deal to play for that team and that franchise. They're not going anywhere. You could potentially go play for a Super Bowl caliber team without you. Yeah, sign me up. And again, I mean, maybe Brandon Sheriff loses that rep to Aaron Donald just like Quentin Spain did. But at the end of the day, I think when you compare both players, Sheriff's an upgrade over Spain. And that's no disrespect to Spain. But it is what it is. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, you didn't watch the Super Bowl, because the last play of the game was Aaron Donald beating Quentin Spain to throw Joe Burrow to the ground for an incomplete pass, and it ended the game. So the Bengals have to improve up front. I mean, it's just obvious. It is so obvious. I don't know what other options they're going to look at 31 outside of Zion Johnson, Trevor Penning, Charles Cross. I think those are, and Charles Cross could again be a top 15 pick. Very well could be in the mix. So we'll see what they do. We'll see what they do. And I will say this for Washington fans out there that read my mock draft, which I'll get into here in a moment, because I do have an announcement to make, which is why I also did the show. But I will say this, for Washington Commanders fans out there, don't sit here and comment on my mock draft and say, yeah, they're never going to draft an offensive tackle with the 11th overall pick. You have no idea what your franchise is going to do, because Brandon Sheriff is gone. You don't really have a quality guard behind him. And keep in mind, you could move Sam Cosmi inside from right tackle to guard if that makes your organization better. And then you potentially look at Charles Leno at right tackle, or bringing in Charles Cross and playing him at right tackle. Whatever you want to do. I mean, look, Commanders fans, Washington fans, whatever you want to say, you can do whatever you want. But the safe pick for that franchise is drafting an offensive lineman. I don't care what you say. We'll see what they do, but that's the safe pick. And maybe it's Tyler Linderbaum at 11. I get it. They've got some nice pieces up front. But at the end of the day, I don't believe Brandon Sheriff's coming back. I don't. So we'll see. But Washington, that's a topic for another day, because we're going to get into that tomorrow, and that's the announcement portion of the show. So there was a time during the fall that Damian Parson and I were doing a weekly show on a Saturday morning or a Sunday morning, because it was really the only time that worked best for me to do a live video show. And it was great. We did a lot of NFL draft stuff, a lot of college game day type stuff, and it was great. But we went away from it, and I haven't picked it back up, but I'm picking it back up now, because we got essentially, 8 to 10 weeks until the NFL draft, somewhere in that range. So it's going to be here before we know it. And over that time, I want to be able to talk mock drafts, talk players, talk teams, talk film, talk ball, whatever it is. So the Cover One fantasy team that we had throughout the summer, Anthony, Greg, Rich, those guys did a phenomenal job doing the fantasy stuff. So for me, I got to thinking, Anthony's schedule's pretty packed with this guy's coverage, the Cover One Buffalo show, the same thing with Greg. So Rich and I are going to tag team the Cover One Draft weekly show. It'll be live on YouTube. Rich is going to host and kind of be like my guy in the middle, steering me from conversation to conversation, doing the chat, throwing topics at me, throwing questions at me, and we're going to have some fun. It's going to probably be maybe an hour long at most, and it'll be 7:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time every Thursday night, and we will do that until the draft, and we'll go till probably no later than 8:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, and tomorrow's episode will be some general draft questions that Rich will have prepared. Whatever questions show up in the chat from people that listen or watching the show. And then we will be breaking down my first edition of the 2022 NFL Draft with a mock draft that I posted on Monday, the day after the Super Bowl at 8 a.m. So if you haven't seen the mock draft, what you need to do is go to cover1.net, or you can go to my Twitter at RussNFLDraft. It's pinned at the very top of my page. Go ahead and click it. Go ahead and read it over. It's not just, a quick paragraph about why I like a player. I do some detail of why it makes sense. I look at the cap structure of your team, and I break it down in that regard. I look at in upcoming free agents, and it's a good time. There's a lot of information to unpack. I think the picks are relatively realistic. It's not for everybody. I really don't care. We're going to break it down even more, though, into little bite-sized pieces for you guys on a Thursday night tomorrow, 7:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So again, that's Thursday on February the 17th at 7:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Okay, so we're gonna get into that. It's gonna be a fun time, and it's gonna be something that we do every Thursday between now and the draft. And I'm looking forward to working with Rich. Rich is looking forward to working with me. It's going to be a lot of fun. And that does not mean the audio podcast is going to go away. I'm still going to do audio 2 to 3 times a week and fit it in when I can. And it's going to be a lot of fun. But look, today's show was going to be brief. It was to recap the Super Bowl a little bit, me giving props to my guy Matthew Stafford, because there's a lot of people out there hating him. And I just want to say that I appreciate the play that he did for the 11, 12 years that he was here in Detroit. It was not easy. It goes to show that the Detroit Lions are a joke of an organization. They should be embarrassed. The fact that, sure, they granted him his wish and traded him away, but the fact that you had 11, 12 years with this guy, you had a team in 2014 that looked pretty good, and you couldn't make it happen, shame on you. The fact that you couldn't build off of that, shame on you. The fact that they never opened up their checkbooks to bring in a big free agent, despite having a young quarterback, a Hall of Fame wide receiver, some nice pieces defensively, the fact that you couldn't get that done, that's on the organization. That's on the organization. They moved from Jim Caldwell, and while it felt like it was time to move on, they regressed, and they have not recovered since. We'll see if Brad Holmes and Dan Campbell can get it right. They've now officially got 2 picks in the first round, which they've officially had the entire time, but it's official at pick 2 and pick 32, and then they pick again at 34. So Detroit's a wild card, but Cincinnati, we know is got to go with an offensive lineman. Which offensive lineman, I have no idea. Could it be Sean Ryan from UCLA? Could he be a sneaky first rounder somewhere? Absolutely. And then beyond that, could they try to move up and get somebody else? They absolutely could. We'll see how it plays out with Cincinnati, but they've got to upgrade that offensive line. And I will say briefly here, Kansas City and San Francisco on the conference championship stuff. They lost. Yes, they lost. But Kansas City picking 30th, San Francisco not having a first rounder, giving it to Miami. I will say with Kansas City, the player that scares me the most for them in a good way is at pick 30, Roger McCreary out of Auburn. If he's available, I think that they're going to look extremely deep at the secondary here. Tyrann Mathieu could be gone. Ward could be gone on the outside at corner. So if that's the case, I think Roger McCreary, even though he's maybe more of a nickel, I think he can play outside because he's athletic enough, he's competitive enough. But could they look at him at 30? I love the fit. And I wouldn't be surprised if they looked that direction, or if they looked at a safety like a Jaquan Brisker out of Penn State or a Daxton Hill out of Michigan. We'll see how it plays out for Kansas City, but I think secondary is the way to go at pick 30. And then briefly, Miami at 29. They're interesting because obviously this pick belongs to San Francisco, but with Miami, this is their first rounder. And I know some people will say they need to go out and get an offensive tackle. Maybe they can land Trevor Penning. Maybe they can go out and get, Bernard Raymond or something out of Central. I will say this. I don't like Bernard Raymond in the first round. That's just me. Watching him up close and personal at the Senior Bowl, I thought he lost a lot of reps because he wasn't fast enough at that left tackle spot. He lost reps because he could not anchor consistently enough, but football is still new to him. The offensive tackle position is still new to him. So there's a lot of raw talent there, a lot of tools that you can work with and build around, and maybe that's what people will do, and maybe a team like Miami would be intrigued by that. But I will say with Miami, I do like the thought of a potential wide receiver falling to them and just going back-to-back wide receivers in these drafts just to build around Tua. And if it's Chris Olave, awesome. If it's Drake London, awesome. Treylon Burks, awesome. Is it Jahan Dotson? Maybe. Maybe that's their slot receiver moving forward. Albert Wilson could be gone. Could they look at him as a slot receiver? I mean, it's all possible. So Miami's going to be really interesting, and we'll get into them more tomorrow. We'll get into more on Kansas City and the rest of the NFL. But just wanted to touch briefly on some of these guys, give a quick update from an audio perspective. I will tell people 67 offensive players watched and graded here on my board for the 2022 NFL Draft. I'll run the numbers on the defensive side. I've got my horizontal board up in front of me. Excited to get into it more, breaking out these scouting reports. Going to have the draft guide ready sometime in April, aiming for the first week. It's going to be a lot of fun. But like I said, guys, you guys can find the podcast wherever you find your podcast. Just search Cover One NFL Draft Podcast. You can find me on Twitter at Russ NFL Draft. Wanted to pour one out for my boy Matt Stafford winning the Super Bowl. Congrats to the Rams. The NFL draft season is officially upon us. We're going to get more into it each and every single week here on the Cover One NFL Draft Podcast.